almost 2 years ago now, it's hard to believe, back in May of 2022, I wrote a letter to Mayor Hayes when things were first starting to bubble up that the Bears might be coming to Arlington. And I asked 3 very simple questions. And I think you FOIA'd the letter, but I brought it just in case. Whether or not the Village of Arlington Heights was going to consider a TIF district, because as everyone in this room knows, that has big impact on a community and a school district within that community. How the developer would account for student generation if they build homes, or townhomes or anything, that would generate families and students. How will they account for those students? Because in our district, we were working on a referendum at that time. We've since passed it, a $193 million referendum. Balanced our enrollment. We're building through construction. If a lot of kids come, where am I going to put these children, right? I'm going to have to hire teachers. I'm going to need more space. How will they determine student generation and then those associated impact fees? Because it costs, in my district, over $16,000 to educate a student. In our high school districts, that number is even higher. I think we're getting closer, honestly, to 18. So if it says 350, 300, 400 kids, what is that going to look like? How are we going to fund it? And then lastly, just wanting to be part of the conversation, right? We asked, I said it once and it became a headline for a very long time, that seat at the table, but an actual seat with some teeth, so with a voice, because this was great opportunity for our community, all of our communities, but it's going to have significant impact. So we really wanted to make sure that they understood that impact and that they were considering all 3 school districts and the children. Arlington Heights is solely in District 15, so all 326 acres are in my boundaries. I think Lisa's district would be
the west side,
which could be potentially the stadium side, potentially. And Scott is then on the east side. I'm not good with directions. And you would be the mixed use.
And all the mixed use.
And then the mixed use. So just really very early on, we're stressing student generation and TIF. That would tie up that increment. So that would be potentially really debilitating for our district if they didn't take those points into consideration.
I think what's important, though, is we're also fans and are just as excited as everybody else about the potential of this happening. We very much want it to happen for our community and for the organization, and as I think is pretty widely known, the majority of season ticket holders are Northwest suburban people. So it can be really good, and we recognize that what Mr. Warren and the Bears have shared that they want to do can probably only be accomplished to that scale on this property. We see that, but we also know that Mr. Warren wasn't employed by the Bears when when Mr. Phillips purchased the land and Mr. McCaskey. So it's perfectly appropriate for the new president to evaluate all of his options and ensure that he's making the best decision for the team in the direction that they go. And we support that. We want them to, we want them to have what they're dreaming of, because again, we as fans will get to enjoy that. But this, what Laurie shared are practical, real concerns where we have to separate our fandom from doing what we feel is best for our school districts in cooperation with our school board, and have an eye towards the impact it'll have on the community, because the tax base and some of those concerns are very real, not so much short term, but very, very long term. Because if we find ourselves in a 23 to 40 year window of time where the taxes are flat, and the only images we've seen of this property have a very large residential community to it. We don't know if that'll come to fruition or not, but that's all we have to work off of.
Several of you were at Hersey, right? The Hersey presentation?
If it produces hundreds of students, Laurie's point is right. Those students need to be educated, and we have a very high standard in which we hold our districts to, and we're very proud of that, and our community holds us to meeting that standard. And if we can't financially support those students, then that's just going to put a strain on our system that we think is avoidable, which is why we want to engage in these conversations now, so we don't have to wish we had later.
And our 3 points, I said to the group, I've been at this for almost 2 years now, and it has stayed the same. It has stayed the same. Where will we educate our children? How do we fund their education? And what will you do if it's a combination pilot? When I wrote the letter, a pilot wasn't a thing, right? I was just worried about were they going to TIF all or a portion of it. But to Scott's point, if it becomes a combination deal, we still need to be made whole and to not be harmed by having this wonderful, opportunity potentially within our districts. And that's why we've been pretty diligent, I think, in communicating with the Bears in the village of Arlington Heights, trying to reach something that we've all said needs to be a win-win for the community, for our schools. The Bears, have their own stakeholders, and we've been at it for a couple of years now, trying to reach a deal that everybody can support, and at the end of the day, will be good for everybody.
Enthusiastically engage with the Bears, because we're not. There's been a narrative out that we're obstructionists or we're in the way. That couldn't be further from the truth. Every request that's been made, we've found our way to some version of yes, with an explanation as to how it could impact us, and sought to share that understanding all around. And
how is your access with the Bears? Are they open to you?
They are
easy to get
very amenable.
They have been pretty responsive.
We've met several times
years
with
ago
Mr. Warren
in a summer meeting.
Yeah,
that you weren't there yet.
Right.
Second day or third day on the job, we met at Kimball Hill School. We let the Packer fans stay home that day, and just Bears, their ambassadors were there. We really read him into the situation to that point, and we've communicated. Initially we weren't communicating, and I would say a lot more, after these last couple months, 6 months. But certainly a ton of communication with him the last couple months.
And it's come a variety of ways, whether we're directly involved, our attorneys are involved, with the village.
The village served as a conduit there for a while. In the fall. But as we became closer to this property tax review board deadline, that's when our communications with the Bears directly
really kicked up.
Increased, and they've been very responsive. We believe they wanted a resolution. We just weren't able to achieve one. We were close, but
I feel like it. And the
way
papers,
closer than $100 million.
I was going to say the paper said it was $100 million, and that's false.
And
That is a false
and
narrative.
all the topics that Laurie went through. We are either in agreement or very close to agreement.
Can you tell where you're not in agreement? I saw the note in Saturday's story that said you're very close. So what is it that's holding it up from your point of view, do you think?
It's just that assessment.
The taxes.
That
Years
amount, is that
2023, 2024. And then roll how we set those 2 years will have potentially a long-term impact when the triennial assessment, the valuation.
And potentially the pilot.
And I think that's what it really needs the accentuation on is that we're still of the mindset, because that's all we've been given up to this point, is that some form of legislation has to occur. And I think as we talked earlier today, as we were preparing for this, we were introduced to the concept of this property and pilot because the Bears submitted legislation before we were engaged in the conversation. So now that we're engaged in the conversation, the pilot is all we have to work off of. So if, assuming that's still a direction we have to go, the valuation that the property has will have a 40-year impact on our community.
If it's approved as written, which you said a 40-year window.
And so all we're after is a fair evaluation of whatever that is. And if the Property Tax Review Board decides in the Bears' favor, we'll accept that and we'll continue working to move forward. We're just looking for that fair evaluation. It's not abnormal for us to engage with the Property Tax Review Board. It's a part of the process.
We have attorneys in all of our districts that watch property tax appeals, to make sure that everyone's paying their fair share. So this, to your point, is very. We didn't ever think we'd be doing it with a multi-billion-dollar real football team, but this is a pretty common practice within school districts that have TIFs, and we have between us, over 20.
I have 19.
19, 6, and I don't know how many TIFs you have, but over 30 active TIFs within our school boundaries. And every year we have folks that object to their taxes, and there's a process for it. But we fight the same good fight because we rely on those dollars to help educate kids and pay our operating expenses.
Forgive me if I have these numbers wrong, but the most recent story that I recall saying had the Bears thinking that the property is valued at $160 million, and you having it valued.
Vice versa.
Ours you had at 160 and them at 60, right? Exactly, and that's pretty far apart.
Well, but it's not so much the Bears believe that, and we believe that.
It's what our
we hired an independent appraiser to assess the value of the property, and it was after
And is that the value of the property as it stands now, or the value as it's envisioned in the?
as it stands now.
Oh, it stands now. It's
Right.
worth billions. Of
Right.
dollars. They're going to build a $5 billion
Right,
stadium.
exactly.
Is
The
what
county
they're
assessor
saying.
said 197 million. The purchase price should be the assessed value, and that there was an uproar about that. We had we engaged with Maroos, who's a widely respected appraisal firm in this area, and they did an assessment and it came in at 160 million. We shared that quickly with the village and the Bears, thinking we just
That would help.
helped
Yeah.
with a $37 million difference. This might be our way to progress. And then that wasn't met with that. So we were a little surprised. But then most recently, the conversation was, we want to negotiate with you, but we have to have data to fuel that negotiation, because we are responsible to 3 separate board
boards.
of educations that are elected people of 7 members on each board. So 21 people have to sign off on everything that we do, theoretically, or 4 per board. But
12. I'll do the math.
appreciate it. just a history teacher over here. But point being, that accountability, we can't negotiate with a concept. We have to have an appraisal. So then when the Bears in December, very recently, brought 2 appraisals to the table, they were lower than we expected, but at least they were numbers and we could begin negotiating. And that's when the conversations began, once we finally had numbers to work off of. So when it's $100 million, it's an appraisal that they brought, and then our independent appraisal that the Maroos.
So the appraisers are $100 million apart
Right.
in terms of our negotiations. We're
Extremely.
not
You're
$100
closer
million
than that,
apart. So I think that's
Okay.
a little nuance.
But it's hard to kind of nail down the nuance for the public. I mean, because
Sure.
all they're going to see is the 160 and the 60
Right.
Sure.
Correct.
until some.
But that's
agreement.
exactly why we focused on the request the Bears have made the entire time, or which was communicated to us as an average property tax bill of $5 million. a
They
year
wanted
is what they
certainty,
wanted.
property tax certainty. So like my points to the mayor and kind of what we've been on around, theirs were that they really had 2. Property tax certainty, right, before they make this long-term and very expensive commitment, right? They want certainty, and I understand that, homeowners and whatnot. And then they wanted around $5 million. And we worked really hard as a team to deliver that to the Bears, and we did in terms of our offer, and it was, we didn't reach a settlement yet. We didn't reach an agreement.
Not yet.
Not yet. I used my growth mindset yet. We're still hopeful, but that's kind of where it stands right now.
Some of the recent stories out of Chicago
Sure.
have been that Arlington is, I can't remember the exact term used, but not in the running as much as it was before. Have you gotten that feedback too, or no?
So I think, no, Mr. Warren has said, Arlington Heights likes it, a lot of possibility, but there's a lot of Bears fans in Chicago. There's a lot of folks in Springfield that support interests in Chicago. He has to make sure, and I don't blame him one bit, quite honestly, as the relatively new president and CEO, he has to kick the tires on all options that might be related to Chicago to make sure Chicago's viable. But I think what they're looking at in Chicago is still rental property, and I think they want to be owners. So I think he's doing his due diligence to make sure they can't make that state-of-the-art stadium that the organization really wants in Chicago.
But they paid $197 million for 326 acres in Arlington Heights. That is the largest single piece of property in all of Cook County, including Chicago. And where Willis Tower is, I believe it's $1 billion property, and this is going to be 5 to 6 times that. So what they could have, it's hard to say, hard to ignore what Arlington Heights could be.
Yeah, they would have to change the
But that's
scope.
not our decision to make.
No, it's not.
I understand and respect that he's looking at all those options.
Right, but the mixed-use component is really what Arlington provides, stadium and mixed-use, 365, 24/7. Chicago might be more of what they have now, be a better, much better stadium. And I've been going to Soldier Field my whole life, but it has its limitations that we're aware of, and they just have to decide really, I think, as an organization, do they want a newer stadium in the city, or do they want that state-of-the-art stadium with the mixed-use component in Arlington Heights. They're landowners, so I think right now they're just doing their due diligence. As Scott said at the beginning of our time together, he wasn't part of the purchase. He came on after the fact, so he's got to kick all the tires, and he's definitely doing that.
To me, there's kind of a curious element of this notion that you and the Bears are trying to come to agreement on the valuation of the property. I mean, basically, that's the Board of Review and the assessor's job, right? So, in that context, how important is it that you and the Bears come to agreement? I mean, eventually.
Well, that would be our normal process with any business that they were appealing their taxes. Is our tax attorneys would go in and we'd have an assessment, they'd have an assessment. If we could reach agreement before the Board of Review, we would. If not, it would go to the Board of Review. It's not an unusual process for us.
Oh.
It may be unusual
but
for the public, but
you
it's
can
not
reach an
for us.
agreement without the Board of Review.
Well, so
then it goes to them,
Right.
and they have to approve it.
Oh.
So they could have, let's say we had reached an agreement, we did it. We were in the room and we didn't leave until we reached that agreement. The Board of Reviews could certainly have said
Yeah,
no
they
to
can
the
overrule
agreement.
us.
They can overrule us. That's
Up or down.
their
They can-
sole responsibility. They can say, you've got it, we're going to accept it, to Lisa's point, with other properties within our boundaries, or they can say no chance. This is a pristine piece of land, 326 acres with rail and road access, et cetera, no way.
Yeah.
So we were trying to
I was trying
settle.
to envision myself
Sure.
debating with the bank over how much my property is worth, and say, hey, the bank and I agreed it's worth this much. Why does the assessor say it's worth this much?
Right.
But, it's sort of the same thing, except that
The final arbiter is
final
the Board of
arbiter is the Board
Reviews.
And that's I guess what I was trying to get at, to get to. Scott, you also mentioned, and both of you I think have mentioned, that whatever is determined now was for the next 40 years. Is that related to the TIFs, or that can't be
Pilot.
related to the, or the
It could be
pilot?
either.
Could be
Yep,
either.
Either.
TIF is
Because
typically
obviously if
23.
they put $5 billion on there, it's
Right.
going to be a lot more valuation than
Right.
160 million.
But I think that's part of the misconception of the there was a claim that we're being greedy and they're chasing money, and all we're asking for is to be made whole if students come to us. And we believe we're there in terms of the understanding with the village and the Bears on that. But this landfall of money, like the property won't be fully valued in terms of their proper their taxable assessed value until any TIF can expire or any pilot legislation that helps with that purchase also expires. So we're kind of operating under the mindset that we won't see a windfall of money like the village may see in terms of sales tax and things like that with those TIF dollars for a 23-year minimum.
Which is TIF, and then up to
So
40.
how many generations of kids will come through before that's a reality? And that's fine. That's the process. But what we have to be careful of is the valuation of the property in the next couple of years. Those 2-year windows could serve as the base valuation for whatever Springfield uses to build this pilot legislation. If it's too low and the assessor says, no, the property is going to be worth here, but a deal is, and pilot's built on something else, there's a gap. And that gap is concerning and could have
compounding,
impact on
compounding
our
negative
community.
impact for up to 40 years.
It could increase the tax rate on everyone. And that's a conversation that hasn't been out there, that we're trying to keep a long view of where this of this conversation, so that we aren't all hurting for 23 years because of a higher. We already pay high property taxes in Illinois.
Very high.
It's the hardest part of living in Illinois, probably, other than the winter.
Yes, it's true.
And that's
we're-
another
we're-
group
we're
we've spoken
sensitive
to.
to that.
We've spoken to our local legislators, walked through our process of what we've been doing, our concerns, and making sure they understand where we stand with the legislation that they may possibly put forward. And I think they do understand where we are and support us.
Chris, I just think it's important to also note, though, while yes, we want them to pay their fair share, and we have to look out for our kids, but that also doesn't mean we're not willing and trying to be as creative as possible to think about a path to accomplish this goal, because this has never been done before. This is as unique of an opportunity as any of us will see in our careers. So there has to be a unique solution to a very complex and challenging path to reach an agreement, and we're open to that. But those things that Laurie mentioned in her letter have to be the baseline of we keep in mind is we're here to serve kids. You know, we're not property tax attorneys. We don't do assessments for a living. We set systems so our kids can learn and feel a sense of belonging and be healthy.
And the Bears are very respectful of that. They
absolutely
understand that
are.
completely. So did the village in terms of where we come from as a school district. And that's why we got to agreement on so many things.
So Dr. Heinz, to follow up from what you first said, the questions that you asked 2 years ago, have you gotten any type of specifics from the Bears on number of students, possible enrollments, how many housing units, what kind of stock, condos,
Right.
apartments? Have they given you any hard numbers on that?
No, so what we based our initial numbers off of was the Hersey High School presentation, you know, where that was done in the school. We took a lot of pictures of the presentation, and then we hired someone that would do some modeling, you know, some urban planning, some modeling, and we have an estimated number of students that could potentially be generated in that mixed-use area. The Village of Arlington Heights, you know, has a lot of kind of authority, if you will, to determine what type of housing, if any, were to come into that development. So it's more conceptual from the Bears, that presentation out at Hersey. And then we have communicated our concern on a number of occasions with the village that we would not want to see a bunch of single-family homes or, you know, too heavily of a populated area. We likened it to the Glen. You know, we certainly hope that we don't have student generation to that level, because I would need, after passing that referendum last November, to balance my enrollment, and we're spending a lot of money on construction, I would potentially need another school in Rolling Meadows, and that's quite an expensive endeavor.
So the projection you guys have based on the beautiful
Just
PowerPoint
conceptual.
at Hersey, what's that number that you
350.
guys, 350 new students that would move their way through 15,
Correct.
and then some of them, well, most
Would
of
be
214.
would be
yeah.
214.
'Cause
The
that
Rolling Meadows
site-
High School.
Yep. And that would be a new school.
Potentially.
From what you've seen, have the Bears disputed that number, or are they just, they haven't
No,
given you any?
they haven't. Just to say that it's conceptual at this point.
Yeah.
Right.
But
Our
we
conversation-
did get to agreement on how that would be funded.
Okay,
So-
and that was an MOU, but I
Correct.
think you said
Yes.
that is now, is that still?
Oh no, it's very
no.
much loved.
It
hasn't
Yeah,
been.
it's
Yeah,
the
it's-
tax
Until-
settlement
It has
issue
not been- right,
is
it's
the
not
only
on the
outstanding
table,
item.
still
Okay,
sitting
it's
on
on
the
the
table.
table, okay.
That's
It is.
But
correct.
they understand that student generation and the assignment of students, they understand that point that was in that initial letter to the
And that
mayor.
was both the Bears and the village.
So there is agreement on that topic.
There's going on a lot of
A
topics.
lot of
Okay.
topics.
So, yeah, you guys agree about a lot. Is it really only the property tax thing, or are there other sticking points?
As of right now,
Right
it's
now
property
it's
taxes and only property.
2023, 2024 property tax valuation.
So, and I appreciate the explanation, and I think, I mean, I cover these things with school districts, and yes, there are other big major developers and people that contest, and so I understand it, but the unique thing here is that you have the Bears, and this is a huge potential development here. And then what's unique is this pilot concept. TIF is one thing that's around. Pilot would be maybe 40 years. But wouldn't the Bears dispute that, because you guys are negotiating for 2 years, but it has ramifications for 40. Wouldn't the Bears argue that, well, we'll have that negotiation later. Let's focus, I think that's their point, from what I understand, that let's talk about these 2 years here. Can't you guys come to an agreement on these 2 years and we'll talk about later? Kick that can. Isn't that what they're saying?
Potentially, yeah, I think so, but we don't know what that later is going to be. And if Springfield, as we see Springfield do every single year when it comes to education, they don't always consult us on what they want us to do. So if they make a decision and set that base valuation on an agreement we make now, we just need to be set in our position so that we're not regretting something later. But
And then the role of the triennial reassessment after those 2 years, 23 and 24, then what impact does the 2 years of that base valuation have, if any, on the triennial reassessment? So there's some unknowns.
Then there's access to the appeal process and the review process, but there's not. The assessor sets the value. And what he or she chooses to do, if it's Katie now, if it's someone else down the road, that's completely out of our hands.
So the $5 million number, I know you mentioned it at the board meeting, talked about an average of $5 million. The other thing that, and this gets in the weeds as I like to do sometimes, so.
I didn't know that about you.
And I'm not a numbers guy, I'm a words guy, Dr. Rowe. That's why I'm in this job. But they told me there'd be no math involved.
These are big numbers, a lot of zeros.
These are, so that $5 million average, so again, it's hard to not be in the negotiating room to, a lot of this just operating in a vacuum in my head, but $5 million average, are you guys negotiating, again, are you negotiating over a 2-year time frame or a 40-year timeline? When you're talking about like an average of $5 million, because if it's just $5 million, $5 million, $5 million, some years might be higher, some years might be lower. It depends if it's vacant or not. Maybe you could explain some of that.
Well, it's not over a 40-year time period, I can tell you that.
Okay.
But I will tell you, the assessor has said under no uncertain terms that 2023 must be at 25%.
Because it was not vacant.
And that was a challenge for us. As we didn't dispute. If they wanted the 10%, we didn't take issue with that at all. But we were told it wasn't going to be. So assuming the 10% would be acceptable in 24 and beyond until the stadium was erected, then that was kind of our avenue. So no, we never talked about a 40-year window of time. But it's kind of on the more shorter term to get to when maybe a shovel would go in the ground.
And they've said that could be, because I think their point is this pre-development period. And we should pay nothing, because there's nothing there right now.
That's the 10%. You've got
The
the
10%,
25
right.
and then the 10% potentially 24 until shovels in the ground because
So
they're using that vacancy component.
Okay, so nothing right now could be great one day. Everybody could make money 40 years from now. But the other argument, and you need to look no shorter than the comments on some of the stories from some of our readers about, okay, you guys made X amount of dollars, 2 million, 3 million when the racetrack was there. Okay, horse racing, dying industry, et cetera, now it's nothing. If this deal doesn't happen now, whoever's to blame on that, whether the Bears choose or people want to say the schools, whoever's greedy, and nobody gets anything. The schools get nothing, the village gets nothing. I mean, I'm just presenting that devil's advocate argument of what if this deal falls through now, the Bears stay in the city on the lakefront, and now you have a hole in the ground in Arlington Heights. Then what? Nobody gets anything then.
Well,
Until it's sold and redeveloped.
right. Or
They're not going to
planning
sit on
what is currently out
$197 million worth of property for very long. We wouldn't think.
So you
But
would say it's
not
kind of
being
short-sighted to
not
assume that
being the
nothing's gonna happen
Bears,
there.
right? I
Well,
don't
the
know
village
their
has been
long-term
very-
plan,
the
but
village-
Something will
plans.
be there. It might not be the Bears. You are confident
Correct.
there would be.
I mean, the Bears probably the best and biggest option that we're aware of, at least, unless they've got
But that
the
is-
village has something else up their sleeve.
that
we
is
don't
prime
know.
real estate. We all know that in this area, so we feel strongly that they would put something there, or they would sell it and allow.
But again, to your point,
knows?
I see where you're
We
going
don't
with
know.
it, and you're not wrong. But it connects to the what if of this situation, and if it's we're talking about a 23 to 40 year base valuation that is legislated on a property value of what a sweetheart deal that Churchill Downs got that we weren't involved in, then we may be left hurting if it were to produce a ton of kids and the MOU doesn't happen, and then all of a sudden there's a lot of dominoes there. And what we can't do is put our school districts in a position where families who move here because of our school districts don't get what they came here for, which is a world-class education.
So just last question going forward then, the timeline. So I think you mentioned the other day you anticipate, I mean, unless there's a settlement, and your attorneys are probably still talking, but you think next week there could be some decision? And
That's
that,
the
That's the
earliest
earliest,
that
I think.
our tax attorneys predicted.
They
We
said,
don't-
but
we
it
don't
could
have
be
any-
up to a month. Imagine it being on that review board. This is a pretty significant situation that they're dealing with.
well, and they go through these cases all the time, but this one, like we were talking, I mean, there were so many people in that Zoom room where normally these are pretty typical things. All the attorneys are in the room. and this is a big one.
Sure is.
You have a 3-member board, but then isn't there something you mentioned also about like a re-review period?
That's what it's been explained to us, this
Yes.
re-review period. After a decision is made, there is a window of time for negotiation based on that decision.
So the board would vote 2-1 or 3-0 or 0-3, and then there would be a period where the parties can get back in the room and
Correct.
settle.
Yes.
If one side doesn't like what the other
Okay.
decision is, and there's common ground then.
And then I'm also confused because I've covered millions of school board meetings in my career, millions of village board meetings.
Sorry about that.
But yeah. But then there's this PTAB thing. Can either party appeal to them? And then when is the final decision at the end of all of this? But after board review, isn't there PTAB or are they not involved in this?
There's two, I believe there's
Yeah.
2 avenues that it can be appealed again.
Yeah. Okay.
One of them's PTAB, and I don't remember what the other one is off the top of my head. But there's 2 different avenues.
Okay. But so the last time with Churchill Downs, that was a settlement between the parties before the board of review got to take a vote, right?
Right, and then
Okay.
the Board of Review
Accepted.
accepted
They
it.
accepted.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
But again, typically of what you guys do, where you appeal in, I don't know, hundreds or thousands of these, are things normally cordial? I mean, again, not being in the room, not being one of the attorneys, or maybe it just seems like this is a really big decision. It's a really big
It is.
developer. It's a big property, but and I'm
Professional
thinking,
football team. There's just a lot of interest.
I'm
as
just
you
wondering
know.
if there's comparables. And I think like of the Motorola property, which I think is 211, did you guys have any issues with that?
I would tell you that maybe you want to look into Sears Center.
Yeah,
Sears.
That,
Yeah.
you know, and just
That
go
broke
back
down.
to, not to pull a retiree back to the table, but Ken Arndt was superintendent
Yeah.
in 300 when that happened, and offered some horror stories
And
of
the
what the school
district
district went
suffered.
through when they didn't do what we're doing now. And that, you know, that has kind of served as a
Our guiding light.
lesson learned. Don't
Don't
put
do
yourself in
this.
this position
Sure.
again, because the bad stories of what happened. They were caught flat-footed and suffered for a long time.
That's District 300.
It is.
Yep.
I just have a couple more questions that are somewhat related to where Chris was going with what if it falls through. I'm imagining that happens. If that happens, bears own this property, they don't want it anymore. So they're going to sell it off. Do they sell it off piecemeal? Do they sell it off as one big
It's up
piece?
to
They have
them. We
the
don't
option
know.
to do either one. And have you given some thought to how that could affect you? I mean, it could affect each of your districts alone, and the other districts not even be involved if something like that
I think
happened,
that's why
right?
the relationship that we've, cultivated, with the village of Arlington Heights. We'll go back to communicating more frequently with the village of Arlington Heights about what that might look like. And from a zoning perspective, I don't think they're interested in a lot of single-family homes.
They're pretty emphatic
so
about they will not zone it for single-family
Housing.
home development.
So we've already had some of those conversations early on, because it again links back to student generation, our facilities being large enough to welcome hundreds of new potential students. If they went single family, it would be thousands potentially. So
Yeah.
they know very well that we don't have the room for that. And I agree, they were.
And I don't think it meets the needs of what they want for Arlington Heights, their goals for
Yeah.
that property either. It's a, like I said, highly sought after, very visible property. They want something, an attraction that's going to bring people to town. So at least that's what they've communicated with us.
I would agree.
And they're not bound by anything to
Yeah.
not do that, but that's what they've shared.
Well, my last question would just be, so then have you learned some things through this process that if this one falls through, that it would help you know better what to do the next time, and would you do anything differently?
Well, I know some things we definitely do the same. Is we knew exactly what, as a school district, was important to us. And that's what Laurie laid out in the beginning. And we haven't changed those points along the way. We haven't, added in 1,000 other things. We've just said we need to know about, the tax certainty, how that plays with TIF, and with this new pilot that we had never heard of or experienced before. And then our students. Are there new students? How many new students? How are we going to fund a new school? Those have not changed. And I think with a new developer, we'd approach it the same way. I mean, that's how we approach it with
Right.
any developer, is we talk about the tax base, TIF, and we talk about students.
And I think also just communicating early, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sending that first communication, get a conversation going, try to work collaboratively, right? Both sides, we should be able to reach a win-win agreement. I think that's what we're trying to do right now. So we were collaborative, we've been transparent, we've been communicative, but we've also been steadfast in making sure that our schools and our communities are protected. So
and
I like
just
your approach. Like
Chris said in
you've done
his
well.
question about something contested relationship, and it wasn't. I know that wasn't his intention at all, but just for clarity, there's nothing about our conversations that have been contested or have been contentious or argumentative. It's been extremely cordial and friendly. We see a great. I mean, there are tremendous opportunities. This happens. Tremendous opportunities. Not on the financial side of the house, but on the student experiential side of the house that this relationship can bring. So we're very much interested in that. And the Bears and the Village have been very receptive of that. So we see what our relationship can look like down the road. But we feel, based on the few points that Laurie shared at the beginning, those are kind of our North Star in this conversation, and we have to stick to those.
When you say student experiential side, do you mean because you have more revenues to do things for students?
No,
or
no. I
because
mean,
there's
you
things
think about it
Having an
just at
NFL
the high school level.
team.
Career
We have college and
pathways.
career pathways. Those career pathways from sports management to
We
just,
do at the junior high
you
as
know,
well.
we're running a major organization. The opportunities for our kids to potentially have internships and job shadowing opportunities that are super unique.
Every one of our pathways. contain
Graduation.
Yes.
The
New Bear
logistics of
Stadium.
hospitality when you're serving that many people.
Very
and
cool.
Everything.
Very Yes.
So the ideas and opportunities are endless. It's just on the relationship side, we'll get through this, and then we'll talk about the fun stuff.
Yeah, one step at a time, and 23, 24 is the immediate need ahead of us.
We still feel very good about our ability to get there. It's a lot of this is just it's their decision. It's their team. But
He's our eternal optimist.
We're nowhere near as far apart.
Yes, it's
It's
been
a
portrayed.
double negative. We're not as far apart as some of the perception is, and that the appraisals we're way closer than that.
I presume you don't have any interaction with city officials from Chicago or any sense of
We have
how forceful they're going to be or want to be.
I think you have to look to Springfield.
Yeah.
Springfield could pose a bigger obstacle than anyone ever dreamed that we could be.
And you get good support from our lawmakers.
Oh,
Absolutely.
Oh,
They're
wonderful.
wonderful.
Absolutely. Great conversations.
Mary Beth Canty's, Gillespie, in Gillespie, Mr. Walker, they're very wonderful, approachable. They're looking out for their communities, their constituents, but they're excited, as we are, about the possibilities.
Not to end on a somewhat hardball question, but I'm just maybe
I'm going to do it anyways.
I'll ask it in a different way. In terms of what of the Bears, I guess, in your, because you have a good, again, not contentious, you're saying it's a good relationship. And yet, there's these public statements that they put out months ago basically saying because of this stalemate, because of the contentious negotiations with the school districts over the taxes, this has led them to look elsewhere. And maybe this is a negotiating ploy, whatever, but now they're considering Chicago, Naperville, yes. And it seems like the Bears publicly have blamed the schools, and I think you guys would have a response to that. Well, if we didn't have this school district battle, we'd be all gung-ho about Arlington Heights. That was their sole priority, and then last summer, no, now everything is on the table again.
Well, I would say that with the meeting at your school was Mr. Warren's first or second day.
His first day.
First day of work with
So
his
if you
boss
think
in tow.
about, that was the very first
Yep.
day on the job. The man hadn't had the opportunity to assess the entire situation. I would say it's a negotiation tactic, and not one that's necessarily meant to be divisive, but one that's to put his company in the best position it can be for the best outcome for them. So I think that all along we'd be in this exact same situation because, again, Springfield, they have to go through Springfield in order to get something done that they've said they need that public assistance that Springfield's going to offer. So if you begin to look at the makeup of the Illinois General Assembly and how many people are from Chicago, you can't ignore their votes in Springfield and the impact and support that they have. So it's been a convenient argument to keep the conversation going about looking at both areas. And we're not surprised one bit that all of the others have fallen off, and now it's just down to the best possible location for all they want and their current home and a political environment they have to navigate through. I think that it was a convenient argument, honestly. It stinks. We don't like it because it's not true, but we understand it, and it was used in the process.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why we're here.
It is
to give you guys a chance to ask us anything, because
we have
that wasn't something that
It is simply just not
it's
true.
not true.
I mean, yeah, you guys feel like maybe you've been portrayed unfairly for however this happens, but
Correct.
in other words, you know, the greedy schools are to blame, that argument. But when the Bears put that out there publicly that we're going to look elsewhere, you're suggesting that's politics.
Sure, it's politics. It might be a negotiation strategy. I think it's a variety of
Okay.
things.
And it's them looking to make sure, if I was in
It's
a
due
private
diligence.
industry, I'd make sure that I put the best thing forward for my company.
Right, it's due diligence. He's advocating for his team and his organization the way we are for ours.
And again, a private company and a public entity, and we're funded by taxes. They don't want to pay they want to pay as little taxes as possible. If you look at it through their lens, I understand their why. I just hope that they and the public can understand ours. We're tasked with educating our kids, and not that we need more all the time, but the cost of everything is got to be taken into effect. We want to have the best, which we do. We have to maintain that level, and 400 new kids without the dollars to come with them would cripple our system.
Yeah.
And you've seen the complexity. This is short term, but it's much bigger than a short term. I mean, there's 1 or 2 years of a tax assessment, but then there's a 23 to 40 year impact that because it may be tied to that. And that's not an easy concept for someone who's not in the minutia to understand.
Right.
And if you were at the Hersey presentation, you know that what they're proposing, the multi-billion-dollar impact to the good that this will have on Illinois, Cook County. So it's a long game. We're stuck in these first couple of years, but you know, this is going to be a very long endeavor.
But again, I go back to think about, you know, like if you look at the history of things, and you know, when the Sears Center was built and the school wasn't engaged, they were left
Just disastrous.
in a hole, and it impacted them. You know, I want to say $75 to $100 million short of what they could have received had they been engaged to, again, educate kids. And it's an enormous school district with a lot of needs. So that's the reason we engaged, to ensure that didn't repeat itself here. And it's been perceived as we're chasing dollars, when we're actually just protecting our interests, which are our kids.